Thank you for this presentation. I already shared the screen. You shall see the presentation. So in my paper, I will examine Leopold Blaustein's contribution to the phenomenology of sociality, viewed from the perspective of aesthetics. Before I will outline my argument, I want to say a few words about Blaustein, since for sure his name is not included among the mainstream phenomenologists. Blaustein was born in 1905. He studied at the Faculty of Philosophy at Jan Kazimierz University in Lvov, roughly between 1923 and 1927. He studied there under Ingarden, Twardowski, and Ajdukiewicz. After Twardowski's recommendations, Blaustein studied in Freiburg, in Breisgau, in the summer semester of 1925, under Husserl, when Husserl lectured on the phenomenological psychology at that time. He received a doctoral degree in 1927, and later, in 1927-28, he spent some time in Berlin, where he worked on the revision of his dissertation. In Berlin, he met Stumpf, and moreover, he studied Gestaltpsychology under Wertheimer, Köhler, Levin, and others. Blaustein's dissertation was published a year later, in 1928, under the title Husserl's Theory of the Act, Content, and the Object of Presentation, as the very first monograph on Husserl published in Poland. Although Blaustein was very active in Lvov's philosophical circles, he did not obtain a position at the university, but he continued his studies on aesthetics. In 1939, Blaustein completed his magnum opus, written in German, Die ästhetische Perzeption, the aesthetic perception, but the book, as well as its manuscript, were lost during World War II. Ingarden notes that Blaustein died probably in 1942, killed with his wife and their son by Nazis in the Lvov Jewish ghetto. Other scholars note, however, that it is also probable that he killed himself in 1944. In the present paper, I will focus on Blaustein's aesthetics. Blaustein defines aesthetic experiences as complex acts which are founded on perception, as such, they have a primarily passive character. Beyond perception, aesthetic experiences also consist of feelings, judgments, and volitional acts, which all constitute subject's reaction to the aesthetic object. Though the experiences are mainly passive, the subject is, as Blaustein puts it, strictly active, and as a result of its activity, the aesthetic object is constituted. Therefore, the object is not given simpliciter, rather, it arises in a correlation with the subject's reaction. Thus, the object can demand an adequate presentation. To analyze this complex phenomenon, Blaustein used psychological, descriptive, and phenomenological tools. At this basis, he presented interesting analysis of, for example, cinema goers' experiences or theater goers' experiences. Here I want to investigate a part of Blaustein's aesthetics. It is, I will examine how he introduced the phenomenon of the body into the context of aesthetic experiences. Blaustein's analysis of the body, its role in the aesthetic experience, and its connection to joint or intersubjective experiences is mirrored by the original meaning of the Greek word aesthesis. As Jagna Brudzinska remarked, and I quote Brudzinska, the Greek concept of aesthesis refers to both phenomenon of sensus perception that relate to the five senses and to sensuousness in general. End of quotation. Indeed, the Greek noun aesthesis originates in the verb aisthenomai, which literally means to perceive. Brudzinska then rightly connected this meaning with perception and sensuousness. However, as she continued, some phenomenologists enlarged the narrow meaning of perception that was formulated by early modern empiricists, who reduced this phenomenon mainly to passive sensations. In turn, from a phenomenological point of view, the meaning of aesthesis also covers the phenomenon of original experience and, as is crucial for aesthetics, phantasmatic and kinesthetic sensations. This description also holds for Blaustein, who understood sensuousness in his aesthetics in the broad context of bodily movements. This general concept was elaborated by Blaustein at three intertwined levels: the body as the center point of aesthetic perception, which enables the constitution of the aesthetic object by the ongoing perception of it from different perspectives. 2, the body projected into the so-called imaginative world of art. And finally, 3, the body of another subject, which is the basis for empathic perception of the other psychic life. My paper will be divided into 3 parts related to these problems. Part 1, the body and perception. The level of the body and the phenomenon of perception is connected with the speciality of perceived art objects and, more generally, with the phenomenon of the perspectivity of perception. Blaustein emphasized that perception involves different perspectives, and this is possible due to the body of the viewer. In imaginative presentations, he presented a general description of this phenomenon in the following words. That's my translation. Whenever I perceive the world around me, I only perceive one part of it. The part I'm able to perceive, in which I exist at the moment, is filled with large or smaller number of spatial objects. My body is, of course, one of these objects. I get bored with the world around me, so I escape from it. After a while, I'm in a totally different part of it, which is filled with totally different spatial objects. One object in particular was there, however, and must be there too. And that object is my body, which I could not escape from, even if I tried. Consequently, my body occupies the central point in the apprehension of any of my spatial relations. Something is behind, something else, and something is in front of it, something is to the left, and something is to the right, depending on the position my body occupies. End of quotation. Blaustein's description concerns a few aspects of perception. So, the phenomenon of perspectivity of perception, the speciality of a perceived object, the speciality of the body, a strict connection between perception and the body, since spatial objects are given in different orientations, back, front, left, right, and thus the body is comprehended as the 0 point of different orientations because, as Blaustein put it, I cannot escape from the body. It is striking that Blaustein analysis mirrored Husserl's investigations from his ideas too, in which one reads about the body as the 0 point of spatial orientations. However, the book, Husserl's book, had not yet been published in 1930 when Blaustein published his imaginative presentations. It is probably not possible that he had an opportunity to read the text during his stay in Germany. It is arguably that this account is his original contribution to aesthetics. In any case, for Blaustein, the body is the 0 point of the perceived orientations of spatial objects. This, of course, also holds for art objects. In this context, Blaustein drew a parallel between the perspectivity of perception in general and the perspectivity of the artist's perception. The artist has to take an optimal position while perceiving some objects which are depicted or presented in an artwork. This is crucial for the painter since, following Blaustein's contribution to the psychology of the cinema, Goer, and I quote, the painter must take a position sufficiently distant from the painted object or objects to be able to embrace their outlook with one glance. Otherwise, the painting will be unclear in terms of spatiality. End of quotation. Of course, the 0 point of these artistic orientations or perspectives is the body of the painter, or more precisely, the embodied painter. Analogically, someone who perceives a painting, it is a subject of the aesthetic experience, should take an optimal position while contemplating this artwork. All in all, one has to explore a space with one's body to determine which position of the body is optimal for perceiving the artwork. Of course, sometimes an object does not require such movements. For example, a panorama of mountains which surround the perceiver. This, however, is an example which still shows that the body is the 0 point of all orientations, even if ongoing movements are unnecessary. Part 2, the phenomenon of projecting the body. This level just described by me of the aesthetic experience corresponds with the most basic experience of the body. It also determines another level. It is the phenomenon of projecting the body into the so-called imaginative world of art. In 2 essays from the 30s on the imaginative world of art and on apprehending aesthetic objects, Blaustein refers to the painting of Jacob von Ruysdael, in which one sees a windmill by a river. He claimed that the landscape represented by the painting contains a series of special characteristics. I quote Blaustein, after all, he writes, in Ruysdael's painting, some objects are higher, other lower, one behind the windmill, the other in the front of the windmill, one closer, the other far away, one to the right, the other to the left, end of quotation. In other words, the objects represented by the artwork are oriented as if they were in the world that surrounds us. Given, however, that the 0 point of all orientations in the surrounding world is the body, The body is also the 0 point of orientations in the imaginative world. It is the world imaginatively presented or perceived by the imaginative presentation. The objects represented in an artwork are therefore oriented in relation to the body, yet the body here is understood as being projected into the world of the artwork. So the objects represented in the painting are oriented in relation to the ego or to my body. It is the center of all orientations. Objects seem to be placed closer or farther from me, meaning my body. The same holds for the experience of watching a movie. The camera occupies a certain point in space, which seems to be the 0 point of orientations. It is the body of the perceiver. Some objects move closer to me or my body, whereas other objects are farther from me or my body. Thus, as Blaustein wrote, and I quote, "I will say that this house, this bridge, these towers and mountains group in the front of my body, but not before that body here sitting on a chair at a desk, but as if projected into this world, which reveals itself when looking at the painting. I'm there, but I'm invisible. I can even specify the exact place where I project myself, on this side of the bridge, which I cannot see. In the place..."
Witold,
yes?
I'm so sorry for intervening. I believe your PowerPoint is still on slide number 2, because I see a little image. Maybe you're referring to that. Sorry if I'm wrong.
I will try once again. You mean right now it's better?
Yes, now we see the quotes.
Okay.
Thank you.
So on this side of the bridge, which I cannot see, in the place where a photographer or painter would stand, wanting to photograph or paint the objects I see. End of quotation. For Blaustein, the objects represented by an artwork have a property of quasi-spatiality. It is they are interrelated as if they were real objects in the surrounding and spatial world. Given this, however, a crucial question arises. How does one experience these quasi-spatial objects? Blaustein's key insight in this regard lies in his description of projecting one's own body into the quasi-world. The objects of the world are oriented as if oriented in relation to the projected body. Yet the body is invisible since it is the 0 point of all orientations. As such, it is not given, but enables and gives other objects. Blaustein's idea of projecting the body describes the phenomenon of the perspectivity inherent to artworks, including paintings, movies, or theater plays. For him, the aesthetic experience is embodied in at least 2 senses. It is constituted in corporeal movements, and it changes the way one experiences oneself as the embodied subject. The former is clear if one keeps in mind the situation described by me. The latter, however, so that the experience changes the way one experiences oneself as the embodied subject. So this is more complex, this situation. While perceiving a certain artwork, one projects their body into the world represented by the artwork. It is the imaginative work of art. Here, the experience of the body divides one's own body into the body of the perceiver of the artwork and the body projected into the artwork, as if one were there. Blaustein went even further by claiming that the body can be divided not only into two objects, but also into three or more parts. I will not discuss this issue here. So last part, part 3, the phenomenon of joint experiences. Both described by me levels of experience concern the subjective or egocentric mode of embodied experiences, which are focused on my body, or to employ Husserl's language, on a living or subjective body. The third level mainly concerns the phenomenon of perceiving the other's body. In Husserl's terminology, a physical or objective body, Körper, and a constitution of other psychic life on the basis of perceiving a mere physical body. In a word, this level concerns the phenomenon of empathy. In general terms, this phenomenon concerns the problem of understanding others and the question of social cognition. In the context of art, this phenomenon concerns the problem of understanding the characters represented in a work of art. Blaustein claimed that empathy is crucial for understanding the aesthetic experience. In an essay on apprehending aesthetic objects, he held, I hope you see quotation number 4. Okay.
Yes.
Great. The objects of the aesthetic experience are often psychophysical beings or things which do not have a psyche, but which are spiritualized by us. The perception of such objects requires, among others, empathy for the states and mental experiences expressed by these beings. Therefore, understanding the expression of a face on a screen, the voice of a radio play character, a novel's character's utterances, etc., depends on the subtlety of the subject's empathy for the other psyche. The subject of the aesthetic experience can have this ability in various degrees, and the accuracy and richness of his perception of mental states and experiences depends on it. This is a rich source of its active influence on the shaping of the object of the aesthetic experience, whereby, for example, an oversight or misinterpretation of what the subject expresses is often also an oversight of its aesthetic values. When reading this fragment, it comes as no surprise that for Blaustein, the perceived physical or objective body of the other is a psychophysiological object which is spiritualized by the subject of the aesthetic experience. If one sees a person depicted in a painting or a person filmed in a movie, this person is apprehended as having his or her own psychic life. It is as a spiritual being or person. The perception of the body is crucial here. In Blaustein's writings, one finds dozens of examples of this empathic perception. For example, in the schematic and symbolic presentations, he analyzed Hans von Maurer's painting Die Lebensalter. The body of a child depicted in the painting expresses corporeal inactivity. The body of a young man expresses his work and efforts. The body of an old man expresses a reverie about life. Yet this mental state is expressed in the face. It is in the body, seen in the painting. Interestingly, Blaustein held that empathy is not limited to the psychic life. However, as a more general ability, it can be useful to describe the phenomenon of feeling the emotional atmosphere of an artwork, or the phenomenon of empathic feeling that one fictional character empathetically feels for other fictional characters' psychic life. For example, in imaginative presentations, he analyzes Shaw's play Caesar and Cleopatra. In Act 1, one sees Cleopatra's anger at Caesar, who thinks that he is now dreaming. To conclude this part of my talk, let me notice Blaustein's idea of joint or shared aesthetic experiences. In an appendix to the 1938 essay on the perception of radiodrama, he considered the question of the subject of a radio broadcast, radiodrama. It is a solitary subject who aesthetically experiences the broadcast, or is one justified in describing the broadcast's audience? It is a group of subjects who share a common experience. Blaustein accepted that one has, as he put it, an isolated aesthetic experience. Yet these experiences can be determined by a group or community of subjects. So there are indeed subjective aesthetic experiences, but there are also joint lived experiences, which can be determined in their intensity, quality, or time. In radio broadcast, this phenomenon is possible not because of a joint aesthetic object, which is subjective through and through for Blaustein, but because of a joint emotional attitude, which is built in joint actions, such as the applause heard in a radio broadcast. The influence of a community on a solitary subject of an aesthetic experience can be diverse. Blaustein noticed, for instance, the phenomenon of one's attention being shaped by the others. He stated that young people can shape older people's contemplation of a work of art, or that the entire audience can wait for something to be presented in a radio broadcast. Or even there can be a certain atmosphere or mood that is shaped by the entire audience. He emphasized that such aesthetic experiences share a joint attention. He was aware that there is no strict influence or causal link between a community and a solitary subject. However, he noticed strong suggestions or motivations which are constituted on the basis of communal or joint experiences. He wrote, and I quote, "The influence of the audience can affect the very course of experience, and not just its external expressions. It can cause new phenomena, for example, seeing beauty, or it can change the intensity of experience. For example, weaken admiration or even modify the quality of experiences. A viewer who does not like something at the first may like it because of the suggestion made by the environment." End of quotation. So Blaustein held that these descriptions are also adequate for an audience in a cinema or theater, where a solitary experience is shaped by joint emotional reactions, such as laughing together at an actor's joke. In conclusion, one can argue that for Blaustein, the subject of the aesthetic experience is both embodied and embedded in a community. This also shows Blaustein's main contribution to the phenomenology of sociality. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Witold. Now, accounting also for the technical difficulties, we have around 10 minutes for the discussions. I see already two raised hands from Daniele Nucili and Paolo Furia. I am not aware who is the first, but in the order on my screen, Daniele, maybe, and then Paolo, please.
I was not ready. Thank you very much, Witold, for your paper. I enjoyed very much. Found very interesting. Yeah, I have a question about this concept of projection of the body into the picture. It's something that we find literally in the aesthetic of Theodor Litz. And then we find also in the theory, aesthetics theory of Geiger and the philosophy of perception of Sharp. That could be my question. There's some indirect influence of the empathic theory of aesthetics from Litz in the Blaustein work. This is my simple question.
Yes, of course. Geiger and Sharp, they are extensively present, especially Sharp, the perspectivity and the intentionality. It is extensively used by Blaustein, but I was wondering why he referred rather to Sharp instead to Husserl, for example. And I think that Sharp's analysis from Beiträge, his early essay on perception, stands somehow in accordance with Brentano's understanding of intentionality, because of the influence of Twardowski. So in my paper, I emphasized this fact, this historical fact, that Blaustein studied under Husserl, but I'm not very convinced that he was influenced by Husserl himself. He used extensively Sharp or Geiger, more even Sharp than Geiger. In Geiger's, he picked up only a few selected ideas. But yes, there is. And another source for the theory of empathy, of course, it was somehow on the table because he was also the student of Ingarden in Lvov. And Ingarden at that time corresponded extensively with Stein. So they corresponded also about the theory of empathy. And Ingarden presented his original theory of empathy, also discussed in Das literarische Kunstwerk. But anyway, I think that the adequate background or framework to understand this theory in Blaustein is the classical German aesthetics rather than Geiger himself. So it's very complex theory also in terms of backgrounds, influences, and so on. But I hope it's somehow helpful.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Okay, so now we have two more questions. First, Paolo Furia, and then Sonia Rinoff-Kreidel. Please.
Thank you very much for your talk. I don't know the author, so I have a curiosity, because this focus on the issue of the body remind me of other phenomenologists of a later generation, such as Merleau-Ponty, for instance, and also the connection between the emphasis on the body and the emphasis on landscape painting reminds me of Merleau-Ponty. This connection is quite interesting. I was wondering if there is something also about the actual experience of landscape. It says that in the same time we had also a little earlier, we had Simmel, who opened up a path of inquiry about the landscape, and I was wondering if our author here says something about that. Thanks.
Thank you for these questions. The first question, I think of course, there is this well-known line of development of the phenomenology of the body, which somehow is rooted in Husserl and later developed by Merleau-Ponty and others. But if you are asking about why body is so important for him, I said this during in my talk, that it is hardly possible that he read Ideas too in Germany, even though the text was edited already, but it was not published by Stein at the time. But I think that why this analysis of the movements of the body is so comparable to Merleau-Ponty is the fact that he was inspired by Gestalt psychology in Berlin. And early Merleau-Ponty, in his early the structure of compartment, he commented on Gestalt psychology extensively, and I think that this topic somehow was present over there. So once again, one would say that Blaustein here is a phenomenologist, but I think that this is somehow a fake similarity between phenomenology of Husserl and Merleau-Ponty and the theory of Blaustein because of the common root of Merleau-Ponty and Blaustein, namely Gestalt psychology and the actual experience of landscape. So Blaustein draws a difference, a strict difference between aesthetic experience of an artwork and aesthetic experience of ordinary objects. And in this regard, he directly refers to the experience you mentioned, that I see mountains, landscape of mountains, and I'm somehow I stuck in this experience. I'm distanced from my ordinary life right now because the landscape is so beautiful. So he differentiated aesthetic experience of art objects and aesthetic experiences of ordinary objects, and he discussed many examples, not only the landscape of mountains, but also a sing of a bird, and so on and so on. So he somehow was open for non-artistic experiences of aesthetic values as well.
Okay, so now for the final question, Sonja Kreidel, you have the floor.
Thank you, Witold. This was really very interesting for me. My question refers to the last two quotations you gave from Blaustein, and it is only due to your reply to this last question that I realized that it touches upon this relation between Blaustein as a phenomenologist or quasi-phenomenologist and a psychologist in his descriptions. Namely, on your last slide, you quoted Blaustein with regard to the influence of the audience on the aesthetic experience. I think this is an empirical fact that often could be stated, but it might be problematic from a normative point of view. At least from a normative point of view, one could argue that this influence of a larger audience on a single person's aesthetic experience could also be an indicator that there's aesthetic authority missing on part of the individual subject. And this seems to be connected with this other longer quotation you gave on Blaustein's remark that the subtlety of aesthetic experiences varies a lot. here again, I would ask, does he describe things he simply observes, or does he here argue with a normative interest? The normative interest in this case could be to ask for something like a virtue model of an ideally rich aesthetic experience. What do you think about this?
Thank you for those questions. Of course, many of these descriptions of different phenomena made by Blaustein, they were also made in the framework of social psychology. And for this reason, I think I agree with your impression completely. So this phenomenological framework is not so clear in his writings in this regard. And regarding the problem of normative aspect of this experience, it is, of course, discussed by him on a few different levels. I will mention about two of them. First, he considers the problem of aesthetic blindness, that we see something exceptional, so artistically valuable, but we are blind for this. We see, but we cannot see this as aesthetically valuable. We cannot recognize this as aesthetically valuable. So he, it is not explicit in his writings, but while writing about this aesthetic blindness, I think he refers to a kind of expert group who can somehow dictate norms of experiences, something aesthetically or non-aesthetically. I think, but he didn't consider the question of values or norms at all. Maybe this is closer to his phenomenological trend of his philosophy. And the second aspect he is considering this is the use of the descriptions of cinema goers' experiences, of theater goers' experiences, to design teaching process. So how teacher can use films in schools to encourage his students to see something valuable in an artwork. So how can we teach students that some films are valuable and others not? And in this sense, he uses this psychology of the cinema goer analysis to explain, for example, how to plan interaction with students during discussion, which aspects should be emphasized by the teacher. So once again, there is this normative aspect of seeing something as aesthetically valuable or non-valuable. He also considered why young students should not watch movies with a very low pedagogical values, which are bad. At that time in the 30s, there were movies about which presented bad characters, bad people, and young people were impressed by them. So he wanted to use his analysis of the psychology of cinema goers' experiences to argue why or how a teacher should teach his students to emphasize valuable aspects and not those non-valuable, that these bad aspects of the movie. I hope that somehow helps. But again, there is no clear explication of this normative level of his analysis.
Thank you. This helps a lot.